Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Max Rounds 30 podcast, where there is no overtime. We seem to still be in contention on whether or not that's actually going to be a thing or not this season. But as always, we're joined by Jeff from Dust2 US in the middle there, and we've got Dat Paladin over there on your far right side, and myself, Jacob Halfman, on your left if you have problems with directions. And in 30 minutes, we're going to be covering all of this week's North American CSGO content, and it's nice. This is going to be our second consecutive episode in a while. We are getting to it a little bit late, but that's a little bit okay. And, well, you know what? Let's get the timer started and let's get right into the notes.
There have now been 0 days since our horrific hiatus on the show. So keep it up.
We're breaking new ground.
Hang in there.
And 30 minutes on the clock. And let's get off with on a really good foot here. So last week we talked about how for the RMRs that a certain TO called Blast was going to fold like a deck chair, if I quote our host in the center there correctly. And that seems to have been the case. Jeff, do you want to elaborate on?
So essentially the issue was, for whatever reason, main part of it was that Blast had their, Valve rather was trying out the invite system for the closed qualifiers for the RMRs. And as a result of that, or maybe unrelated to that, Blast was experimenting with there only being one open qualifier. And I kind of predicted it would end up becoming like a cause célèbre, especially in the European community, because not so much an issue in NA. I feel like if you can't make it through one of the NA Open qualifiers, you don't necessarily deserve to be in the RMR closed qualifier. But for Europe, there's so much contention and there's so many opportunities for, upsets. Like a team in the top 30 can lose to a team in the top 70 in an online best of one. There's always a cheater in every single EU Open qualifier for the major. There's always, German match fixers. So it's really unacceptable that there was only one open qualifier. And like I predicted, as soon as big players started realizing and complaining about it, Blast did say, okay, 2 open qualifiers. I wanted to ask you guys, though, do you think 2 is enough compared to what we had before?
I think 2 is enough for us, for North America, because, I mean, with the number of close qualifier invites that we'll have, I have full expectation that we have the best of the best already kind of locked in for that phase of the tournament. But open qualifier wise, I mean, you go down the list, we don't have too many complete rosters in contention for it to really be a problem. I mean, as you said, Jeff, I think we could have gotten away with one. It would have been dicey for sure, but you wouldn't have everybody at the close qualifier if we didn't have 2. But I think for EU, I still think 2 is a little too less. You just think about how many competitive rosters that they have, and you think about, even your mixes that you create there that go deep in those tournaments. They only have a certain amount of opportunities. I mean, obviously, I think about benched heroes last cycle who couldn't even attend, but they did actually make the gauntlet, and they did it after on that final 4th attempt in the very last placement match to actually qualify. And I don't think we're going to have as many of those stories anymore, which, I mean, it really depends on what you actually think is like important, whether or not you really adore the open circuit aspect of it, or whether you want all the best competition there. But I think all said, it's fine for North America, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how many times did it take for Astralis to finally make it in? Was that Antwerp?
3.
Yeah, it was like,
I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was 4. They got
it was all 4,
Yeah,
if I remember correctly. Yeah. I just remember it was like it was just a cycle on Twitter. Everyone's like, oh my God, is Astralis going to lose again out of this?
Yeah.
And I mean, that is mainly on them, but I mean, there's a lot of teams that, maybe they can't quite hook it up until they get further down. I mean, 2 qualifiers, I mean, truly kind of reduces your opportunities to really to do a little bit of fuck around and find out. But yeah, 2 still feels like not enough for EU. I think maybe 3, and you kind of feel like, okay, you're still pretty strict on how many teams are going to go in, and but you're not cutting. It's just because EU is just so much bigger. I still think you need 3. I mean, we'll see, if they'll expand that further. I don't know if they will, but we'll see.
I think it comes down to how many close qualifier invites come through in EU and whether or not this ranking system actually works out. I think there's a lot of pressure on at least on Valve's side that all of the rankings are up to snuff and that we actually have proper invites for the close qualifying system. If not, that's when they get under even more scrutiny for those two open qualifiers, and the system looks even worse than it actually is. So I think a lot of it comes down to that at the end of it all.
Really,
Yeah, definitely.
really quick. I don't think this made it into our show notes for this week, but I believe last week when we were going to talk about the RMRs, I believe we were going to talk about they're going to be on Gamers Club, aren't they?
Oh
Yeah, they're gonna be
yeah,
on Gamers Club.
And aren't there servers currently only like South US, like Florida and like
I
Texas or
think it's
something like that?
Miami and Dallas. Yeah.
it
Being,
just feels like there are just too many obvious platforms that can easily be used at this point that it feels like we're moving backwards in tournament development for these major tournaments. I mean, I can't believe that Blast would make this kind of an error. But this, I mean, I was having like conversation with other analysts about it, and they were saying that the anti cheat on Gamers Club is far worse than Face It and ESCA, and it's very easy to actually cheat on that platform, which has me even more worried for the potential results that we're gonna have some snubs just purely off of the basis of uh, just how poor their anti cheat is.
I mean, my thought process for it is that you kind of I see why Blast chose literally anyone else because they can't exactly run a qualifier on ESCA or Face It because
I
of the current sort
mean,
of political. I mean, they can like,
PGL
On
ran
Face
theirs
It.
on Face It.
but PGL is kind of more of like only a major tournament provider. They only do the majors and that's it. Whereas
Yeah.
Blast is trying to compete for market share. So I can kind of see they want to establish their own pipeline for
Yes, but also
events in North America.
I don't want to stop you there, but also they don't have a wow, they don't have a competing platform at all for this. They are currently using third-party suppliers. I understand it, but if you're going to share things like, and maybe my worldview on this is too closed or whatever, but if you're going to share like some sort of point system with ESL when it comes to that, at least consider. I would hope at least at some point that it was considered to use one of the Face It or something. Just because like I think in EU I believe that Challenger mode will be an all right service. They've worked a lot on their CS platform and everything over the last few years and actually added an anti cheat that isn't just weird server side occlusion. But in NA, I mean, just like who plays on Gamers Club? I mean, people were talking about playing in was it EGL? It was like that tier 3 CS:GO tournament. People were talking about trying to play I just saw some of this on Twitter, but I saw people saying they were trying to play in like those tournaments and they were just having all sorts of weird issues because of the servers and everything. So I'm not inspired with confidence on trying to qualify for the major on like 70 ping, but I don't know. It's a little grim.
I will say, like, I'm never optimistic about major qualifiers, but I will say, like, it's not like Gamers Club is a startup.
Yeah.
It's not like a startup, investment seeding. It is owned by Immortals Gaming Club, so you could kind of hope they, if anything, would just buy infrastructure for these events, And ultimately, most people do play on Dallas anyways for these sort of things, so it could be more of it could be more, much to do about nothing in that sense, but I do want them to expand it. And I think they can. Like, I don't think it's time to be worried until we have more facts on the ground. I am going to try to
That's true.
find out, talk to some of those guys, and see what they're thinking server wise. But I don't
Pray
want
for
to.
more servers. That's
Yeah, I don't want to waste too much. I don't want to waste too much more time on this topic. If that sits well with you guys.
sounds
Yeah, there's
good.
a lot of crazy results that we got to get through.
Got the spring groups that we have to move into next, and yeah, wow, North America really showed up this time as the classic. I mean, let's start with Liquid. I mean, what? Like, we know that they've been talking about this. Like, they talked on the overtime show about how Yekindar was talking about how they're it's like it's not their saving strats for the major, but like their goal is to really play for the major. But if you're gonna play for the major and just get beaten by OG, what was that, 3 times?
Two times and then one to
2
big.
times, yeah.
And then a big, right? That's what it was. It's not great looking. I mean,
You know what? Matchup wise against OG, I understand the losses and how they came to be. It's the big one that will continue to be as egregious as it is,
Yeah.
just because I mean you're picking into Anubis, and sure you haven't actually gotten any tape on Big Zanubis, but I mean, I think that just the way that veto played out was very poor. It felt like a hail mary against Big of all teams, which I don't think you should be having to have a difficulty in the veto against Big, considering they don't have Dust 2 to rely on anymore. And I don't think that I felt like it was very much Liquid trying to play to not lose, because I mean I think you should be picking Mirage into them 100 times out of 10, just because even though Big love the map and they're trying to make it their home map, they're still not very good on it. And Liquid are very comfortable on this map. They provide wins on this map time in and time out, and it's less of a coin toss to Anubis. Again, you don't have any tape on Big, so
Well, I think
overall I think
the
it. Hmm?
no, go ahead.
No, no. Overall, I just feel like it feels like a Liquid that isn't actually confident in themselves, and it just feels as though that they're just pure instability, just with their basic philosophy of how they want to approach CS.
I just hate it because ultimately, like, it wasn't even competitive. Big just ate Liquid's lunch and then pushed them in the
Yeah,
mud and just and it's ultimately you just worry sometimes about Liquid where it's like they have all the pieces to win. I almost feel like it we'll talk about later. It's like the complexity problem, but to a more reasonable extreme. Whereas you have complexity of Liquid, they have the tools to win, but they just don't do it. And it's like I just, for me personally, I just feel like I haven't seen the same Elige since Shakinder joined, and I don't know if that's just sort of
yeah.
a placebo effect or maybe just my eyes are deceiving me. But it just makes me worried about Liquid because they're not. It feels like after they played, I think their first event with Yakinder, it's been like diminishing returns on that lineup.
Yeah, and it's also the whole Shocks thing, right? I mean, even when Shocks was in the lineup, Leach also looked pretty mediocre, and I think everybody was kind of hoping that when you bring in Yekindar, everything is solved. Leach should be back into his roles where he's much more comfortable. Naf is obviously stable as ever. You've got the young and upcoming Opera of OC, and you've got all the pieces that you need to start winning championships. But as of right now, to me, it feels like Naf is doing a lot. Yekindar is very just unstable
Just looks
in the kind of
dysfunctional.
performances that he puts. Yeah, it doesn't look like a true lineup. It looks like five individuals on paper that
Wow,
should be competing.
an
But
Elige team with an Elige team where the other players are playing well and he's like the unstable element. Haven't seen this one before. Like
yeah, I mean, it's just really tough to gauge Liquid's performances moving into the kind of major cycle. I have very low expectations for them in Katowice, and I think that they should still be able to get a playoff berth. I mean, I feel like this might just be a flash in the pan, just with the kind of fact that they have to leave Nuke open and they picked into Anubis. I mean, it's two maps that they've shown a lot of. I mean, I take that back. Anubis actually looks pretty comfortable for them
Yeah.
in at least matches past, but Nuke does look a little shoddy just from what I watched against OG. So, I mean, I don't think this type of veto will happen again. And I know I'm putting a lot of credence on a simple thing like that, but I think in today's CS, matchup dependent and map dependent strategy does come out. So I still feel as though they can make playoffs, but at this point, I don't feel like that's enough. And we've been like kind of spinning wheels about Liquid trying to qualify for playoffs. This is great, but we got to get back to that Grand Slam championship contending form somewhere and somehow, and I just don't think this roster's it.
Well, before they can get to DC, an NA home event, they have to go through the spring showdown. So we'll see how that
that's
goes.
so scary. Like that. There's
Speaking
a
of the
world.
spring showdown, we'll continue on what you were saying in a second.
Yeah,
I was just
go
gonna say, speaking of the spring showdown, North America is showing up strong for that. Seeing as every North American team is from the Blast spring groups is going to be in the showdown. Not looking great, especially when spring finals is going to be in Washington D.C. Anyways, Jeff, continue.
You wanna okay, here, I got a jump scare for you guys, all right? Watch
Love
this.
those.
Okay, so you go to the spring showdown, the Americans one, because they separate into America, Europe. So there's I think there's gonna be two invite slots or maybe like affiliate events. Let's say who the best teams in America right now. So one of them's Pain, one of them's MIBR. North American qualifier, you get like Nouns. South American qualifier, you get Fluxo. Asian qualifier, you get IHC. Liquid bottle it in like the semifinals, and then you have like Fluxo or MIBR or Pain going to the going to Washington D.C. and there's no American teams
It's
there.
very realistic. It's online as well, right? So
my
I mean,
gosh.
you don't even know whether Yekindar is going to be playing in country or if he's going to be playing if he's going to travel back to Latvia. Like you have no
The
idea.
Liquid organization would not let him play from Europe. I don't think.
Like there's no way, right? Like it's just too
there's gonna be
important.
2 events in America this year, and they're not gonna like let him take a fucking vacation during it. Like
Right.
reality, like it sneaks up on you, you know.
I
when you're Liquid and-
I can't watch Liquid pull a nouns and lose to MIBR. So please, for all of our own mental health and safety, let's not think about that. Is it weird?
The
also,
Brazilian teams that live in America do just like ruin people's lives, don't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, yes,
Absolutely.
yes, but mainly the fans' lives. Teams, if you're losing to South American teams in North America, get better. That's how that works. So
That's true. I mean, you just have to win, really.
just win your games. You know.
Do you think if they don't make it to let's lay a theoretical on you guys. And I know we want to talk about complexity and EG at the event itself, but if Liquid don't make it to the spring finals, what does that imply to you guys? Like, what does that tell you guys? What does that sort of make you think?
I mean, I think it's all irrelevant depending on, if Paris doesn't work out. I think the only way they don't blow up the lineup is if they don't make like if they don't make semifinals or like beyond, I think they just blow the lineup up. Because clearly all of their goals and efforts are being poured into this one tournament, and then they won't even have any way to really bounce back. I mean, they'll have Dallas, sure, but you won't have that continued tournament progression at the spring finals.
If they even show up to Dallas, I mean, they're trying to cut tournaments.
No, they have to. No,
I'm worried Dallas is going to be kind of like a stinker event again, where it's just like visas and the fact that it's right after the major, so teams will be reevaluating. I really do feel bad for I don't feel emotionally upset for ESL very often, but I do kind of feel sad for them and sad for me too because I'll be there. That
same.
That there's going to just be it's just going to be this subpar teams lineup of teams again. I'm hoping we'll probably see Navi this time, which is really good, but it's very very sad.
Dallas is just rough because of the visa issues, and then you also have it right after the major, and then you also have the timings for the local crowd are really weird. The matches are usually a bit early, which is not great, and it's just because otherwise you just don't get European viewership. So yeah, okay, not to get too sidetracked on that. We've got 2 other teams we want to talk about a little bit here before we finish talking about Blast. Let's start with EG. I think we can be fairly succinct on their performance, and it starts with they came out the gate looking strong. They made a few tweets. Well, some people made some tweets, and then they disappeared, and everybody else on the internet was correct. Come on, come on.
I mean, because after all the shit they were talking, the second time they were in the lower bracket against Heroic, they shook them like a fucking baby.
It's progress, but you can't be out here look at it, the system is working. You won 1 best of 3, and now you're in the showdown for an NA event.
That series was Hex. That doesn't necessarily
yeah.
That should. I don't think that should be. I think Hex should be the 3rd or 4th best player in this team. And if he's the only one showing up, there's problems there.
Yeah, he is not a stats player by any means.
Well, he used to be
on that roster.
He used to be.
I mean, not with his roles as of right now. In
this team, yes.
Yeah. And now it really calls into question: can they make it through the play-in bracket? I believe they've got Fnatic, EG, Sprout, and OG all in their segment of the play-ins, and I really don't know if they can get through that. I just don't.
My take is that they're gonna run back to Seattle. They're gonna do a bunch of scrims against their own teams. They're gonna play EG white or EG green. And they're going to come back and they're going to whip out some strats that you ain't ever seen in your life. And it's going to be great. They're going to floor the event. Fnatic will look like crap. They're just going to floor everybody. It'll be great. I don't have high hopes.
You need to grow up.
I'm praying for some improvement. All right.
No correlation to reality. I honestly
lost in the sauce.
Look, if I had to pray for a team's success right now, I'd be praying for complexity because
Real
I think that
transition.
they showed some really good promise. I'd like to think. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that they weren't able to actually close things out against Navi, and it's the second time this actually happening. I mean, they did it at the RMR as well against Imperial. This team has now. I mean, a narrative has finally given way in the fact that they just have a mental block. Like they just cannot win big pressure games. And
My working theory is they leave Twitter open somehow in random locations. They start seeing Ryan at Dust2 start tweeting about halfway through the game, and they go, "We gotta lose this one, boys. We can't let this guy. We can't let this guy feel happy." And that's why they start losing games. That's my opinion on the North
My
American
theory is just
mental.
like is Graham will have a banger of a game, and he'll just look beyond the PCs, and he'll just see standing in the crowd like a Lee's just frowning at him, and he just starts like shaking. He can't play because I wanted to bring this up because Thorin had a really good tweet about this where he said complexity managing to lose out on a third map they were leading 14-8 is exactly why no one believes in this team. When the going gets tough, they go home, and I thought that just summed it up so succinctly that like,
Your airport.
does anyone actually believe in complexity? Like, do you guys believe in complexity?
I have hope.
Does this okay? But does this project get better? Like, does this lineup win?
I still don't
no,
know if their opera is, I don't know if this is it. Sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
No, I don't think this team wins, and I think that there's just. I mean, you can obviously tie it back to just the systemic issues in our region, but there will always come a time where we will have the lowest seed in all of these tournaments, and we will have a very difficult matchup all throughout. The way we break that curse is you win that series, like the Navi series, and that's when the tides start to change and your seeding start to change. You start to get more favorable matchups. You start winning more BO3s, and then you can start to have a conversation about upgrading a piece here or there. But to stay in the doldrums like this and to drop the ball like that, it's another situation where you think back to, maybe we could have a different conversation about complexity if they beat Imperial and, they went deeper and into that whole um, major cycle that year. But you can't. And at one point or the other, you have to draw the line and say, we got to be out of this, out of supporting this lineup. There's got to be some kind of big overhaul for this lineup, and I think it's high time. Unless something magical happens at Katowice, I'm kind of out.
Because the
In
thing is,
general.
the major qualification cycle is right around the corner. Like they only have
Uh-huh.
a couple weeks to make roster changes before they need to qualify to the major. If they miss their second major in the row in the least competitive qualification region in the world, okay, except for Asia, like, but then
Oceania.
then you got to see someone's got to like do something. Like management can't accept that because the proviso I feel like for this brand is that it's a legendary brand, so it makes it to the major, and people are like excited to support complexity, excited to support NA. So like it's a really cheap roster compared to what they've had before. But if they can't make it to the major consistently, then like what's the point?
Right. There's
Yeah,
just
I
no
mean,
money in it at that point, and
it,
you just can't
that's
have
that's the kind
JT
of
going minus 22 in a series like that against Navi. So
well, that's the kind of like baseline for a complexity at this point, right? Like that's where they're gonna get a lot of their revenue from with how cheap of a roster. Like that's the upside of having a cheap roster like this. That you can get those consistent invitations or not invitations, qualifications to the major itself. So, yeah, I think I'm with you there.
I mean, even invitations too. Like they have those reserve slots
Yeah.
in ESL events. They're a Louvre partner. Complexity could go out right now and buy a better team, and it wouldn't affect their operations at all because
Hmm.
they have a permanent invite to ESL Pro League. So it's not like they're like, oh, we got to keep the ranking points from having our NA roster, and it's
Hmm.
time for them to start showing something. It's been a year and 2 months at this point, and it's like
I just still don't know if Halzerk is it for that team. I don't know if JT is it for that team. I feel like Fang is still being underutilized. It's just rough. I'm not super hopeful, but maybe they turn something around at Katowice because they did show some form and they started to kind of look better. But
They're really good on Anubis.
there's only so much that you can just keep looking better incrementally over the course of a year and several months. Like you can't develop as a tier 1 team for that long. That's too long. You are not tier 1 at that point.
their next matches are against Big and Furia. I feel like Big
those
just
are going to be
outbrains
rough.
them. those
Period
are
just shoots them down too. It's just that I don't see them winning either of those.
no, and if they lose, I think they would play probably Pain, maybe IHC. I always get the bracket flip wrong, but like I just the only teams I can see them beating are teams that are just like there to have a good time. You know what I mean? Like
Happy that they're there.
Greyhound's there
Mhm.
for the buffet, the open bar. IHC's there for the ability to boot camp in Europe. Permit is there because ESL anti cheat needs some work. Like ultimately, it's just it's sad for it's sad to see them like this again.
Yeah. Well, I think with that dose of sadness, we'll scoot on from this and we'll move on to Jeff. I believe you wanted to touch on some roster requirements regarding it's recent ESL Pro Tour rulebook changes, if I'm correct.
Right. And so for those who don't know, essentially, and I don't have all the details on it. I've been just sort of keeping up with the discourse lightly because luckily it did get fixed very quickly on ESL's end. But there was the whole thing where even if you're registered as a sub or playing with a mixed team in a qualifier, even in a non ESL event, they were going to try to make an argument that that's like a roster lock, and you can't play for two teams at the same time or two teams within an event window. So there's the whole couple weeks before ESL Pro League. There's up until the end of Pro League. That's a long window. And my main issue with it until they fixed it is it felt like a very blatant attack and sort of a misunderstanding of I wouldn't even say misunderstanding. I would say it's ESL kind of making rules that make sense for pro teams while completely disregarding the semi-pro scene that was what CS:GO is sort of based on. Because consider, for example, someone like Nato Safix. He has an agreement, and I don't want to drop dime on this, but I think he said it before, where he's sort of the long-term sub for Heroic in ESL Pro League and other ESL events. If he keeps getting paid for that, that means he can't play with his new team with Asilian. That means he can't be a sub for an ECL team or be a sub for any other team. And for example, in NA, people love to play the cash cups with a mix, or people love to play the open qualifiers in a mix. Does that mean then they can't play ECL? And it's very ridiculous when you think about it that way, where it was even defined as much as just playing for a team is a professional team, which is just doesn't meld with reality at all.
Yeah, I think it feels as though that there's this tightening of the noose on just open circuit in general, and this is just it's a very slight attack, but it can have some serious ramifications just to see where the headway is going. And I hope that this is not the start of something, because I mean, obviously we've built our whole esport on this open circuit, and when we try to kind of box everything in. We lose the kind of value of the esport in some ways. At least personally, that's just I know it's a preference for a lot of people, but that's what I kind of pride loving this esport on. And I would hate to see just kind of you know uh, subs like this and just opportunities for bigger smaller teams to qualify for bigger tournaments. I think that just overall it spells a little bit of worry on my end.
Well,
Hmm.
I will say I do think that the open circuit is not going anywhere. I mean, I know for a fact that like ESL is very happy with the relationship with Valve and being able to just kind of do whatever as long as you keep that circuit open. I believe that is like one of the big things about that whole scenario. But um, it's I to me it's kind of comes off as like one of those things where you're trying to develop this very concrete rule book for your pro tour and for these super high level events, and as much as I don't like it, tier 2 does seem to fall in the shadow of all of this, which sucks because when you're talking about building a path to pro and keeping a game and ecosystem alive, um that whole path to pro is what's super important. So
It
I'm hoping that it's just one of those cases where it just kind of they kind of went, oh shoot, our bad, we forgot, and they'll just go from there. But
it feels like something that kind of misses, like doesn't have like focus testing, where
you know
ESL needs to have like an appointed player representative or group of people they can ask from all different levels how rules will affect them. If only there was like a I don't know, like a group of workers who
knew where this was
came
going.
together to understand, to improve conditions across the board and agitate as a group to like a like an association or a union of
Player
a player association.
Yeah, like the NFLPA,
Yeah. Like if
or
only anyone ever invented one of those, but
that would
unfortunately
be
we're just not
cool.
there.
I
Unfortunately, we're
like that
just not there
idea.
yet.
Has nobody ever
Yeah,
thought of this yet for
someone
esports?
should get on that. Like
Call it the Overwatch League RLCS
like if
Union
like
or
a really
something.
like
I
if
don't
like
know.
an old bald guy who if an old bald guy who played in the early 2000s wanted to say like, hey, I'll be the face of this project and I won't argue with people on Twitter, and I won't use it to shake down people for monitors and or for money and all that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We only have 55 seconds left here, so here's how I wanted to end things off with. Okay, so let me lay this out. IEM Brazil, open qualifier, first open qualifier. Vendetta won it over Nouns, announced some bigger teams there. What do you guys feel about Vendetta? You like?
I like the roster in the sense that it's got a lot of these just emotionally charged players that are very mechanically skilled, all on one roster. And if they just explode on the scene and play spoiler to teams like Nouns and ATK, I'm all for it. It pressures all these bigger organizations to buck up. And I think it's a great litmus test for some of these teams to kind of show that their system is up to snuff for a bigger event.
In last 10 seconds, I agree. And I also think that as a unit, it's cool to see tier 2 talent starting to get to the point where they are able to compete and fight with the big dogs on that level. And with that, we have hit our 30-minute time limit for this week's episode of the Max Runs 30 podcast. So make sure to follow us on Twitter. That is at max_rounds_30. And
Nice.
make sure to follow, we're on Spotify, we're on audio platforms all over the place. So make sure to go check us out on all that stuff. We like to post funny shit on Twitter. So
We have an RSS feed.
we do have an RSS feed that we do maintain for one listener at the moment. So if you want to become listener number 2,
Yeah.
check out our RSS feed. Well, anyway, that'll do it for us, folks. Thanks for watching or listening to another episode of the Max Runs 30 podcast. We'll be back next week with some more news. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.